They never teach you about the frequency. They just tell you to log it if you hear it. Not report it. Not investigate it. Just log it and move on. Out here, after midnight, radios sometimes wake on their own. No static. No call sign. Just a single word spoken wrong. Every ranger hears it eventually. Some pretend they didn't. Some stop carrying radios at night. Some start closing trails without writing a reason. The manuals never mention why the word exists. Only that it does. If you've ever wondered why certain areas go dark without warning, this is where it begins. Stay with me. The radio clicked at 12:41 a.m., and I know that time is exact because I had already checked the wall clock 3 separate times in the minute before it happened, not because anything felt wrong yet, but because night shifts teach you not to trust your internal sense of passing time once the building goes quiet and the hours stop feeling evenly spaced. My hands were flat on the desk when the click came through, palms pressed down, fingers spread apart in a way that felt deliberate only because I noticed it afterward, because I hadn't leaned forward, hadn't shifted my weight, hadn't brushed the radio casing with my sleeve or my elbow or anything else that could have justified the sound. The click happened anyway. Before that moment, the ranger station had felt empty, which is normal at night, but immediately afterward it felt hollow instead, and the difference between those two sensations is subtle enough that you don't notice it during the day, when rooms are full of sound and light and purpose, but at night the difference feels physical, like the air itself has been scooped out and replaced with something thinner. I didn't reach for the radio. That instinct gets trained out of you early, not through formal instruction but through repetition and correction and watching other rangers pause before they move, because moving makes noise and noise draws attention, and attention at night isn't something you want unless you've already decided what you're willing to acknowledge. So I stayed still. I listened to the building instead, because buildings never stop talking if you give them enough time, especially old ones, and I could hear the slow ticking of cooling metal inside the walls, the faint shift of wood as temperature settled, the low electrical hum that lived somewhere behind the breaker panel and never quite went away. No footsteps followed. No wind pressed against the windows. The radio light glowed steady on the desk, not flickering, not dimming, not brightening, just steady in a way that felt wrong only because I noticed how long it stayed that way. I waited for static. Static is comforting, because static means distance, and distance means separation, and separation means that whatever is trying to reach you hasn't succeeded yet. There was no static. 10 seconds passed, and I counted them without moving my lips, marking each one by watching the second hand on the clock slide forward in small, consistent steps that felt too smooth for how my chest felt while I watched. I counted another 10 seconds after that. Nothing changed. The radio didn't hiss or crackle or shift frequencies the way it usually does when weather or terrain interferes, and that absence made my thoughts start reaching for explanations with names attached to them, because names make things manageable, and I told myself it was tower bleed or atmospheric bounce or a temperature inversion, because those are things you can write down and forget about later. The logbook lay open in front of me, a fresh page already marked with the date at the top in my handwriting, clean and careful, because I hadn't expected to need the rest of the page yet and I hadn't rushed when I wrote it. I didn't move to write anything else. Writing makes things real. The radio speaker shifted, not with a sound exactly, but with a pressure change, the way air feels when someone steps close behind you without touching you, and then a breath came through the speaker, not loud and not strained, just present, like someone standing very close to the microphone and taking a moment before speaking. I didn't answer. That rule isn't written in the handbook or printed anywhere you can point to later, but it's passed down quietly, usually during the first overnight shift when someone older and calmer tells you not to answer unknown traffic at night, and then changes the subject before you can ask why. The breath stopped. I waited again, counting 5 seconds, then 10, then 15, keeping my eyes on the radio even though it didn't change, because looking away felt like an invitation. Then the word came through. It was soft, careful, and wrong in a way that's hard to describe unless you've heard someone pronounce a familiar word with complete confidence and complete inaccuracy at the same time, like it had been learned by listening rather than understanding. The code word. I felt it more than I heard it, because the sound didn't fill the room so much as press into it, flattening the air slightly, and when it stopped there was no click or sign-off tone, just an abrupt absence that felt heavier than silence. I picked up the pen. My hand hesitated over the page, hovering above the box marked for details, because everyone leaves that space blank the first time, not out of fear but out of uncertainty, and uncertainty feels safer when you don't have to define it. I wrote the time. I wrote, audible transmission. Nothing else. The station lights hummed overhead, unchanged, until 1:03 a.m., when the exterior floodlights shut off completely, not flickering or dimming but cutting out all at once, and the backup generator didn't engage, leaving the windows black and reflective and much closer than they had been a moment before. I stayed seated. Movement feels loud at night. The radio stayed quiet. I didn't stand until exactly 2 a.m., and when the chair creaked beneath me my heart jumped hard enough that I froze in place, waiting to hear something answer that sound. Nothing did. I turned off the desk lamp, not because I needed to, but because I didn't want my outline visible against the glass, and then I stood in the dark, listening, waiting, and trying not to think about how long it had been since the radio had last acknowledged me. I didn't sleep when my shift technically ended, because sleep felt like disengaging from something that hadn't finished yet, so I sat in my truck with the engine off and the dashboard dark, letting the vehicle cool while I listened to the forest around the station settle into its late-night quiet. Nothing followed me outside. That didn't feel reassuring. Eventually, I went back in. At 3:12 a.m., the base radio came back on without warning, lighting up the desk in a way that felt too deliberate to be random, and I was standing in the hallway when it happened, far enough away that the sound didn't feel like it belonged to me. There was no breath this time. Just the word. Clearer than before. Closer than before. It sounded like it was being spoken from the next room rather than through a transmission, and I realized immediately that my shoulder radio was still silent, which mattered more than I wanted it to, because it meant the sound wasn't traveling the way it should. The word repeated. Same tone. Same careful wrongness. Not louder and not softer, just patient in a way that made waiting feel like part of the exchange. I checked the windows, even though I already knew what I'd see. The forest wasn't moving. Fog hung low and still between the trees, thick enough to blur depth but not thick enough to hide anything that wanted to step forward. No headlights appeared on the road. No flashlights cut through the dark. The word came again. I reached for the logbook without looking at the radio, because looking felt like consent, and my hand shook as I wrote the time and then the words, "repeated transmission," pressing hard enough with the pen that the paper tore slightly beneath the ink. The radio stopped the instant the pen touched the page. That was when I understood the rule, not intellectually but physically, because the silence that followed felt contained rather than empty, like a door closing instead of a sound ending. Logging isn't record keeping. It's containment. At 3:40 a.m., the wind stopped completely, not gradually but all at once, leaving the trees motionless and the air unnaturally still, and without insects or leaves or distant movement. The silence thickened until it felt layered, pressing into the room from every direction. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall. Waiting feels safer than standing. Standing feels like presenting yourself. At 4:06 a.m., my shoulder radio vibrated against my collarbone without making a sound, and when I looked down the screen was blank for several seconds before letters appeared slowly, spelled wrong, rearranging themselves as if trying to settle into a shape that made sense. I shut the radio off. That was the wrong decision. The base unit turned on immediately, brighter than before, and the word came through one last time, slower now, more certain, like something that had been acknowledged and was satisfied with the response it had received. When the sun finally rose and light touched the edges of the trees, the forest looked normal again, and that normality felt heavier than the night, because normal means unchanged, and unchanged means waiting. They transferred me 2 weeks later without explanation, assigning me to a different park with different terrain and different boundaries, but the same type of radio clipped to my shoulder, as if continuity mattered more than comfort. The first night there was quiet. That bothered me. Silence feels like a held breath. At 12:41 a.m., the radio clicked. Same time. Different station. There was no word at first, just an open channel that stayed open long enough for me to become aware of how heavy listening sounds when it isn't paired with speaking. You can hear listening if you wait long enough. The channel stayed open. I didn't log it. That was the mistake. The floodlights outside flickered once, then again, and then stayed on, casting long, unmoving shadows across the dirt road that led away from the station and into the trees. At 1:17 a.m., the radio spoke. The word. Perfectly. No hesitation. No distortion. It sounded practiced. I didn't move. The radio continued, not repeating the word but using it, shaping it into something that felt like a call rather than a statement, and outside the trees leaned inward slightly, just enough to notice, while the fog moved against the direction of the wind and the radio tower light blinked out of rhythm. I logged the transmission immediately, writing the time, the duration, and clear reception with deliberate care, and the moment the pen left the page the channel closed, the light steadied, and the pressure in the air eased just enough to feel survivable. They still use the code word. It still works. And if you ever hear a ranger hesitate before answering a radio at night, this is why. Some things only stay quiet if you follow the rules. And some rules exist because someone already broke them. For more stories rangers aren't supposed to tell, subscribe to Park Ranger Confidential.